Shalom, shalom, and welcome to Bible study tonight. I wanted to pick up with a little bit of what we've been talking about over the last, we just kind of started it on Sabbath, talking about the counting of the Omer. Now it's interesting because on Sabbath, we were talking about the significance of counting every day of the Omer. Why is it that out of everything, Yahweh told us to specifically count the Omer? And there's a very specific process to it. If you look in Leviticus where it talks about the counting of the Omer, you're to take this many sheaves of barley and you're to wave it this way, and there's a specific thing that you're supposed to do in counting the Omer. And the question that we were talking about on Sabbath is, why was Yahweh so particular? Why is it that you have to do this every day? What is the significance of that? And we were talking about walking by faith being one step at a time. You don't jump steps in your walk of faith. You can progress faster or slower depending on how quickly you grasp the concepts of faith, but you're not going to jump steps. So the walk with Yahweh is one step at a time. So we're in the midst of this counting of the Omer, and every day is counted after sundown, so that begins the next day, and it goes up right up until Shabbat, which is the beginning of June, I believe. But the other part that I think sometimes we don't tend to really pay attention to, we know that there's no coincidences in Scripture. We know that there's nothing that's written there by accident. There's only so many words that could fit into the book of Scripture. And so any word that's in there, Yahweh put on purpose. Even this person begat this person, why are there some specifics that are put into there? They don't seem to make sense. And a lot of times it doesn't make sense because we think of things from a Western perspective. And we're missing out on the Eastern culture of the day, the time that the Bible was written in. And one thing that is interesting is that the counting of the Omer has to do with counting sheaves of barley specifically. And so you look at that and you say, what's the significance of barley? Now, in this congregation, we've talked before about the significance of the almond tree and the symbolism of the almond tree and different things, the olive tree, different things that the Bible talks about as far as plants go. But I'd never really done a study on the barley. And counting the times that barley is mentioned specifically in the Bible, it's one of the 7 fruits of the promised land. We tend to talk about Israel as being the land flowing with milk and honey, which it is, but that's only part of the verse. It talks about it being the land of pomegranates and figs and wheat and barley and dates, and so there's 7 species that it mentions specifically. Barley is one of them. So if it's specifically mentioned in connection with the promised land, then there must be some sort of a spiritual lesson that we can get from it. So just in looking up about the barley, what lessons can we get from the barley? Barley might not be the flashiest of the grains. It's not the most refined. It's kind of a rugged kind of grain, and it's hardy. Specifically, it can grow in drought conditions. So it grows where wheat won't, where a lot of times wheat wouldn't be able to survive in a specific location or in the desert climate. It's harder for it to grow. Barley can. And as far as symbolism goes, a lot of times wheat is thought of as like a symbol of refinement and prosperity. And there's many scriptures in the Bible that talk about the wheat. But barley has historically been a symbol of sustenance during hardship, of Yahweh sustaining his people even in the midst of not the easiest times. Its resilience against harsher climates and capacity to grow in less fertile soil symbolizes endurance through adversity. Now right there you can see some significance in that. What have we been talking about so much lately is enduring and having that bulldog faith that never quits, never gives up, never lets go. And we keep circling back around to that. I think, sometimes we'll try to go off in a different direction. It's like Yahweh keeps bringing us back to this idea of endurance and bulldog faith, because there is an enemy that we are fighting against. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. It's not the people around us that are the enemy. But we are fighting a very real enemy in this world. And it's an enemy that is trying to wear down our endurance, that is trying to cause the pile-on effect to be so much that we can't hold up under the pressure anymore. But barley is a symbol of that faith during the pressure, faith during the hardship, faith during when the enemy is trying to attack. You know, there's this concept, I think, that so many, especially in the Word of Faith camp, tend to grab a hold of, that if you live a life of faith and you're strong enough in faith, you'll never face any challenges. Well, that's simply not true. You know, Yeshua said, I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself, but Yeshua said that in this world you'll have trouble. Like, it's not a lack of faith to say that in the world you're going to face some situations that contradict your stand of faith. You're going to face some contrary winds, but it's what you do in the midst of it that matters. And so barley is rough. Barley is resilient. Barley is sustaining. Can also symbolize humility and divine intervention and stuff like that. So I looked up, kind of following in Sherry's footsteps, I looked up the definition of resilience. And it's interesting when I was looking up the definition, because part of the definition I didn't really know was part of the definition of resilience. But resilience is the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties. It's toughness. So we knew that about resilience. It's a toughness, but it's the capacity to withstand. So you're going to withstand whatever, you know, I think of Ephesians 6, stand, and having done all to stand, you stand firmly in your place. Nothing's going to shake you out of your place. That's resilience. But it's also the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. I think of the term bounce back. You know, you see some people who bounce back quicker than others from things. Well, they're more resilient. There's more of a resilient spirit inside of them. The second definition of resilience is the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape. It's elasticity. You know, you think of a rubber band. You stretch it, but as soon as you let it go, it's going to spring back into its original shape. It shouldn't just stay stretched out. Now, if something has happened to the rubber and has broken down the rubber, it might stay stretched out, but it's not meant to. It's flexible. You know, you think of a willow tree. You know, a willow tree has these long branches that are kind of flexible. You know, a weeping willow tree grows around here. But when the wind comes, it bends, but it doesn't break. That flexibility allows it to retain its toughness, retain its shape without breaking. You see some other trees that if the wind comes and tries to bend it, they're going to break. We don't want to be the type of, when we talk about people like trees planted by the water, we don't want to be the type of tree that snaps under pressure. We don't want to be the type of tree that the wind comes and our top blows off. Like some of these pine trees around here, you know, all of a sudden the wind starts blowing and they're losing needles everywhere. We don't want to be that kind. We want to be like that willow tree that doesn't matter what the wind does. We might be blowing with the wind, but in the end, we're still standing strong because we're resilient. Barley, interestingly enough, it shows up in the Bible oftentimes when people are running low on hope. So one of the key stories that has to do, one of the most powerful, I think, with barley in the Bible is the story of Ruth and Naomi. You know, it talks about how, you know, Ruth and Naomi came at the time of the barley. Actually, let's turn over to Ruth chapter 1. And Ruth is commonly read at Shavuot because it does specifically refer to barley. Ruth chapter 1. And we know the whole story of Ruth and how when Naomi set out to go back to her land, to return from Moab to Bethlehem, she left with her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And then there's the whole interaction where Orpah leaves and goes back home, and Ruth says, I'm not leaving you, I'm staying with you. And we focus so much on that scripture, as we should. But if you skip down to verse 18, Ruth 1, verse 18, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said no more. So they both went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred about them and said, is this Naomi? And she said to them, call me not Naomi, pleasant. Call me Mara, bitter, for Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Now, she was in a place of kind of hopelessness. Like, what good can come out of this situation? And the enemy wants to get each one of us to a place where there's no hope. Like, you can't see the future. You can't see anything turning around. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. And this is a place where Naomi is at, but to the point where she's saying, call me this. We know the significance of names. Like, when you ask someone to call you something, like, I would choose, like, call me blessed, call me healed, call me this. She says, call me bitter. Why? You know, that's the state of spirit she was in. Verse 21, I went out full, but the Lord has brought me home again empty. See, she's blaming Yahweh for basically what they decided to do. Yahweh didn't tell them to go to Moab. Yahweh didn't tell them to do this stuff. But why call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? Verse 22, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now again, take note of that. There's a significance in those words. Nothing is written by coincidence here. So when you look at the story of Ruth, again, it's centered around the barley harvest. We know that moving on through the story that Ruth ends up going and she's gleaning in the fields. Barley was often seen as a staple for especially the poor, but they left the edges of the field for the poor to be able to glean from. In Israel, they still do the same thing. They'll leave the corners of the vineyards, they'll leave the corners of their fields for the poor. But when you're looking at this central theme of the barley, they come here exactly at the beginning of the barley harvest. There's no coincidence in that. Now, you could say, well, yeah, that Naomi planned it that way, that she was going to come back at the beginning of the barley harvest. But we know that Yahweh is the one who's ultimately directing the steps back here. That he's directing them to be in the right place at the right time for their blessing to come. And just them taking the step, you know, as much as Naomi was in this place of bitterness and basically complaining about what happened to her, but even still, she's taking the steps that are leading her out of that place of despair. Maybe without realizing it. Maybe it's because Ruth joined her. You know, we never underestimate the power of coming alongside someone. With Ruth, the fact that she was so committed to Naomi may have been the very thing that connected Naomi back where she was supposed to be. Think of it. If Ruth had not come back with Naomi may or may not have been able to go out into the field to glean. There would never have been the connection to Boaz. You know, there's Yahweh divinely orchestrating these steps through this story. He's not only giving them a supply, a provision. I mean, remember, Ruth brought back so much from the fields that Naomi was shocked. Like, wow, where did you glean from that you got this much barley? But Naomi is taking these steps that are leading her out of the bitterness into Yahweh's provision by being in the right place at the right time. And you see how she turns around through the story and comes to the place where, yeah, Ruth and Boaz get married, and then she's blessed with grandchildren. So you can see a restoration that's happening through her story. And it's a powerful symbol. You know, in Joel chapter 2, Yahweh tells his people, I will restore the years that the locust has eaten. And then he says, the threshing floors shall be full of grain. What was the grain it was referring to? It was the barley. Barley was often the first grain that was harvested in that time. You know, there you have the early crop of the barley, and then you have later on the wheat would grow up where it could. But it's interesting because when you look at the barley The barley is also a grain that's trampled underfoot and threshed. It has to be threshed hard to separate the grain from the husk. It's not as easy to separate barley from its husk as it is to separate wheat. So it has to be threshed hard. So, when you look at that, the resilience is not forged in us in the easy seasons. You don't develop resilience. To go back to what we were talking about on Sabbath about lifting weights, you don't develop strength, you don't develop the muscles by just picking up a piece of paper. I could sit here and lift a piece of paper all day. I'm not going to build any muscles because it's not providing any resistance. It's too easy. I have to actually put some level of discomfort, some level of I'm getting out of my comfort zone so that I can build my resistance, to build my resilience, to build up my muscles, so then I can lift more weight. I can handle more. And people in the Christian circles like to say, God won't put any more on you than you can handle. I don't like that phrase because then it's acting like Yahweh is putting the bad circumstances in your life. And, that's just too easy. Kind of a side trail here, but when circumstances come against you, first question you got to ask is, did I open the door somewhere? Did I, through some of my actions, through being in the wrong place at the wrong time, through whatever, did I open the door for the enemy to be able to get in? Should be the first question we ask. Second question is, okay, if I have not opened the door through my actions, then it's the enemy coming to try to steal, kill, and destroy. He's trying to come and steal the blessing that I know Yahweh has for me, and I'm not going to allow him to. There's the case of David's mighty men who stood in the middle of a plot of lentils and defended they defended their bean patch. Sometimes when the enemy's trying to come in and take what's yours, you just got to stand there and defend your bean patch. And even if you're not, I'm not really a fighter, I'm not a warrior type, I just sit back and let whatever happens happen. Well, in a case like that, you got to find it somewhere deep inside of you to rise up and stand up. I'm a person who doesn't like confrontation myself. People who know me know that. But when it comes to an injustice, when it comes to something that the enemy is trying to take wrongfully, then you got to rise up and you got to speak up and you got to stand your ground. That's what we're meant for. That we are called warriors for a reason. What are warriors for if there's no war? What are soldiers? Why would there be any reason to have soldiers if there was no battle? If there was no chance of an enemy trying to come and take the land that is ours? Think back to the early days of American history and the Revolution. They fought some serious battles for our freedom. It wasn't an easy fight. See the winters of the red snow because of the soldiers that were walking in their shoes were so worn out that their feet were literally leaving bloody footprints in the snow. That was not easy. And anybody in today's world that doesn't have an attitude of gratitude for what they sacrificed for us, they need to go back to history class and relearn it. But that resilience is really what was at the foundation of this nation. If our forefathers had not been resilient, if they had not had that ability to withstand the pressures that came against us, we wouldn't be here, or we would still be under Britain. We wouldn't be a free nation if it wasn't for people who were willing to go through the discomfort of fighting for something. And so that resilience inside of us is forged in the threshing, if you will. And again, that's so loosely thrown around in Christian circles, like God's threshing me underfoot. No, it's the enemy. Okay, what was it that Yeshua said to Peter? The devil has desired to have you that he might sift you like wheat. Okay, he wants to thresh you. And at the end of the threshing, he wants nothing to be left of you. He's not threshing you to make you better. He's threshing you to get you to a place of weakness. There's that phrase, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. I have a challenge with that phrase, because there's some things that may not have killed you, but it caused you to be in a place where there is some sort of coping mechanism you might have that's unhealthy. That you might have some sort of a fear that the enemy now has a foothold or a stronghold in you with, that's undercutting your ability to move forward, that's undercutting your ability to stand strong in faith. And so when we're talking about threshing, it's the enemy that's doing the threshing. But we know that Yahweh can take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it to good for us. You know, and don't limit him, like we said on Sabbath, with the parting of the sea, with the providing of manna, water out of a rock. I mean, who has ever hit a rock with a staff and seen water come pouring out of it? I've never done that. Like in my hikes, if I hit a rock with my hiking pole, I've never once seen water just start pouring out of it. That was a miraculous demonstration of Yahweh's power. So don't limit what he can do and how and the ways he can provide. But, you know, when Ruth went to glean in the barley fields, she wasn't expecting necessarily a miracle. She was doing what her hand found to do. She was taking the step that she could take, and Yahweh met her in that field. Yahweh met her as she acted on what she could do. You know, we talk about how faith is an action word. You can't just sit back and say, well, I'm believing for God to turn this around. I'm believing for God to do this in my life. I'm believing for this. And you're not going to do something to act upon what he's told you. You're not going to do something to prepare. You know, if you're believing that you're in the middle of a drought and you're believing that you are going to have rain, then you plant your crop. What did Isaac do? He planted in the middle of a famine. It made no sense to the natural mind. You're in the middle of a famine. Nothing's going to grow, Isaac. But by faith, he planted a crop. And because he took that step of faith, he received in the same year 100-fold what he sowed. You know, that right there is a significant story of Yahweh's faithfulness. And it should be something that boosts our faith. You know, look over all the stories of his faithfulness to the people who stood for him. You know, and so Ruth may have gone out to the field with empty hands, but she returned with not just barley, but hope and a stronger faith. And then, you know, we know the rest of the story. She ends up being in the line of the Messiah. I mean, you go out to glean barley from a field and you return being in the line of the promised one to come. I mean, what a turnaround in her life and in Naomi's life, because now Naomi's in that same line. But another instance when barley shows up in the Bible is in the feeding of the 5,000. We don't tend to think of that. But when Yeshua fed the 5,000, the little boy came with his 5 barley loaves. And it specifically says it's barley loaves. Why? I mean, he could have just said 5 loaves of bread, and it's up to you to guess what kind of bread it was. But it's 5 barley loaves, something that was resilient, something that had in its symbolism Yahweh's divine intervention and provision. And you know, we know what ended up happening. That multiplied in his hands. So whatever we have, you know, our faith, you know, it says that if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, it's not a lot. But if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to the mountain, be thrown into the sea, and it will happen. It's not the quantity of faith that you have, it's the quality of the faith. How pure is your faith? How much do you actually trust him with that? And it's that kind of faith that will survive the dry places. You know, when we talk about resilience, I think of weeds. And that's kind of funny. You know, we tend to think of weeds in a negative sense. And we were talking about the enemies of faith a few weeks ago, that they're like weeds that pop up in our garden. But in a positive sense, if you look at a weed as a symbol of resilience, you ever notice how resilient weeds are? I mean, it takes a lot to kill some weeds. You know, bittersweet. I keep going back to the bittersweet because we're overrun with it where we live. All it takes is one tiny root to be left in the ground of that bittersweet. And it doesn't matter how much you cut it back, how much you think you've eliminated it, if there's one little root remaining, it will pop right back up and it will grow exponentially. And actually, because you tried to cut it down, now it's in it's under threat. So now it's fighting even harder. So it's going to multiply even more. You cut down a tree, how many saplings pop up out of the stump? So that's what we're supposed to have as a resilience. We're supposed to be, think of it, be as really resilient as a weed. The enemy tries to cut you down, tries to knock you down, tries to take something out, then you're just going to come back stronger than before. That's the attitude that we have. It's the never give up, never quit, but I'm coming back stronger than ever before. And devil, you're going to regret messing with me. Brother Hagin talks about that when he was attacked with that serious illness, and he was on his deathbed, and he got a hold of the message of faith on healing, and got a hold of it to the extent where he started taking steps of faith. Like he was paralyzed, he could barely stand. He pulls himself up on that bedpost, taking a step of faith, and ends up having a ministry that ministered to thousands and thousands of people around the world. Well, you better believe the devil regrets ever having messed with him, because maybe if he just hadn't put that on him when he was younger, then maybe he wouldn't have been so effective at preaching to all those thousands of people. That's the enemy. That's Yahweh taking what the enemy meant for evil and turning it to good. But it had to be a resilience inside of him, a not give up attitude. If you just lay back and quit, then you're not going to see these blessings take place in your life. You're just going to allow the enemy to steal your harvest. But we're not like that. So, again, the barley, it grows in drought. It survives the threshing, and it's enough for Yahweh. Whatever you have, it's enough for Yahweh. Proverbs 24:16 says, though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again. That's resilience. It doesn't matter how many times the enemy might trip you up or try to knock you down, you're going to get right back up. Like the weebles, the weebles wobble, but we don't fall down. Let's turn over to 2 Corinthians. Paul knew a thing or two about resilience with everything that he went through. You just read through where he gives the testament of, I was beaten this many times, I went through this many shipwrecks. A lot of people go through one shipwreck and that takes them out. Paul went through like 3 shipwrecks. Was that what it was? 2 or 3 shipwrecks? And the enemy could not knock him out. And that was because of his resilience, but it was also because he knew who was on his side. So 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and we'll start at verse 6. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts so as to beam forth the light for the illumination of the knowledge of the majesty and glory of God, as it is manifest in the person and is revealed in the face of Yeshua the Messiah. However, we possess this precious treasure in human vessels of earth, that the grandeur and exceeding greatness of the power may be shown to be from God and not from ourselves. Now here's where Paul makes the dividing line. We are hedged in, pressed on every side, troubled and oppressed in every way, but not cramped or crushed. We suffer embarrassments and are perplexed and unable to find a way out, but not driven to despair. We are pursued, persecuted, and hard driven, but not deserted to stand alone. We are struck down to the ground, but never struck out and destroyed. And we always talk about the but being a negative thing, but in this case, the but is the positive thing. This might be a fact right here. It might be a fact that we're hedged in and pressed on every side. Paul's not denying the pressure. He's not denying that there's a pressure that the enemy is trying to come against him with. We talked on Sabbath about how faith is not denial of the facts. Faith for healing is not saying, I'm not sick, I'm not sick, I'm not sick, I don't have this disease, I don't have this disease. It's speaking the truth of the word, which overrides the fact of what might be symptoms in your body. It's not about denial of this fact. It's about presenting a truth that overrides the fact, that cancels out the fact. And you look at this verse, and when it says we suffer embarrassments and are perplexed and unable to find a way out. Now that's I think of a maze. Think of getting yourself down a maze. Anybody ever gone to a corn maze before? I've never been to a corn maze specifically, but I've known of a couple of people that went to a corn maze and actually had to be rescued because they couldn't find the end of the maze, and it was becoming dark. So you get to a point in a maze, or even if you have a maze on a paper, and you're trying to find, say the mouse is trying to get to the cheese. You ever do that as a child, little mazes? And you get to a point and you hit a dead end. You hit a place where you can't go any further. So then you got to go back and try to retrace your steps and find this way, and you find you hit another dead end. So this is what Paul is saying. We found ourselves, we hit a dead end. We are unable to find a way out. But what we're not is we're not driven to despair. Like the circumstances that I might be in does not dictate my emotional or mental state of being. Does not have to. Now, some people might be in that situation, and they say, "Well, I'm despairing. I'm in a state of despair," and it is entirely our choice how we respond to the situations. We've said this before. How many people you can have two people who go through exactly the same situation, but one comes out strong on the other side, and one is falling apart. Why? Because of a resilience or lack thereof inside of them. What is it that is holding you together? I mean, Paul is writing these verses, a lot of these scriptures that he's writing to the churches, he's writing from within prison. I mean, think of it. You're encouraging others while you're in prison. That's a fortitude. That's a resilience. But a lot of times the but is the point that we got to focus on. This might be happening, but we are not. We are pursued, but we are not deserted. We are struck down to the ground, but we are not struck out and destroyed. The enemy always will try to get us to a place where we are convinced it's the end. Ever been to that place in your life? Where you're convinced there's no way out, your life is over, there's no hope, you might as well just throw in the towel and quit. But in that throwing in the towel and quitting is your destruction. If you stick with it, I saw this thing where it was a guy who helps especially teenagers who are struggling with suicidal thoughts. He said, if you can oftentimes get their attention to just stay one more day, just hold on one more day. Oftentimes, feelings are so fleeting, emotions are so fleeting, that by the next day, it doesn't seem quite as bad as it was the day before. You give it another moment, and it might not seem. That's why emotions are such bad decision makers. Emotions will get you to a place where, hallelujah, emotions will just get you into a place that's not good. But I want to turn over to another scripture that kind of goes along with that. Philippians chapter 1. I think Sherry referenced this one on Sabbath. And this here is one of the letters that Paul wrote in prison. So keeping that in mind, Philippians chapter 1, and you skip down to verse 28. And do not for a moment be frightened or intimidated in anything by your opponents and adversaries, for such constancy and fearlessness will be a clear sign, proof and seal to them of their impending destruction, but a sure token and evidence of your deliverance and salvation, and that from God. So that scripture right there, I encourage you to grab a hold of that scripture for whatever might be trying to come against you. Doesn't matter what kind of things are yelling at you. You ever have voices that are yelling at you? Circumstances that are yelling at you? I'm sure Paul's circumstances of being in prison was yelling at him, but he refused to fear. He was in a place where he said such constancy and fearlessness is a sign to the enemy that he's already destroyed. It's you think of it. If you picture yourself as say like in a boxing match, I don't watch boxing, but you picture a boxing match where a guy gives the punch as hard as he can to his opponent. So hard he knocks his teeth out of his mouth. And if the guy just stands there and smiles at him, you know, what kind of a sign does that give to him? That he's not crumpled in the corner, he's not quitting, he just stares him back and smiles. I think that would start to strike a little bit of fear in his heart of the retaliation that might be coming back against him. I just gave it my best shot and you're still standing? That's what it should be when the enemy tries to hit us. Like Mom said, you swallow your teeth. You don't let the enemy know that he got anything in on you. For that constancy, that fearlessness is a sign to him that he's already destroyed. He's got nothing else. And so that fearless faith does more than anchor you. It exposes something eternal in the battle that we're fighting. It exposes the eternal truth that Yahweh already overcame everything. You know, Yeshua said that he already overcame the world. Actually, I think I have that scripture here somewhere. Let's see. Give me a moment. It is in Matthew. Turn over to Matthew. I'm sorry, Luke. Sorry, once more. John chapter 16. I knew it was in there somewhere. John chapter 16. And you can skip down to verse 32, because this is Yeshua talking. He's right before his trial, before he goes to the cross. And he says, take notice, the hour is coming and it has arrived when you will all be dispersed and scattered, every man to his own home, leaving me alone. So he's saying, I'm going to be standing alone, but he doesn't leave it there. Yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. So he's saying that as an example to us. No matter who leaves you, no matter who walks out of your life, no matter what's going on, you're not alone. He's always with you. Verse 33, I have told you these things so that in me you may have perfect peace and confidence. So where are we going to find our peace in the troubled world? In him. If we're staying in him, abiding in him, we have perfect peace and confidence. We know that's shalom, shalom. And nothing missing, nothing broken in him. In the world, you have tribulation and trial and distress and frustration. So he's saying that's a fact of life. In the world, you're going to face the opportunity for distress and frustration. But, and here's another but be of good cheer. Take courage. Be confident, certain, and undaunted. For I have overcome the world. I have deprived it of power to harm you and have conquered it for you. That's a promise for us to hold on to. No matter what the enemy might be trying to throw our way, we can have the confidence that Yeshua already overcame it. He went through all that at the cross. You know, Isaiah says that he took our infirmities, he bore our weaknesses. That's not just sickness. That's every weakness in our flesh. That's everything that the enemy tries to destroy us with. He bore it. Why? So that we now have to bear it too? Is that taking up the cross with him and following him? No. He bore that so we don't have to. He took our place. He was not just the substitute for our sin, but he also took on everything that the enemy meant to destroy us with. He overcame it. He has deprived the world of power to harm us, and he has conquered it for us. So think of that when you're facing a battle. You don't have to conquer in that battle. Yeshua already conquered for you. He already won the victory, and now he's handing it to you. You just got to rest in his victory. In James 1:4, it says, let patience have its perfect work, that you may be entire wanting nothing. In the Amplified, it says, and let endurance have its perfect result and do a thorough work, so that you may be perfect and completely developed in your faith, lacking in nothing. The GNT says, make sure that your endurance carries you all the way without failing. Now think of endurance is like a synonym for resilience. It's something that sticks with it through the tough times. There's different translations that say endurance, steadfastness, and patience. There's another translation that says perseverance. I like the Message paraphrase. It says, you know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. Now, that should be a positive thing. Some people, if their faith life has not been built up and it's showing its true colors, that will show a little bit of an area where they need to improve on. You know, it can go either way. But it goes on to say, let it do its work so that you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way. We talked about a while back about deficiencies. Like if there's a mineral deficiency in your body, there's going to be a weakness there. If there's a deficiency in faith, you're not going to have the resilience and the strength that you need to be able to overcome the battles that the enemy tries to bring your way. The Voice translation says, true patience brought on by endurance will equip you to complete the long journey and cross the finish line. Mature, complete, and wanting nothing. I like that. It will equip you to be able to complete the journey. We don't want to just start the journey of faith. We want to finish it, and we want to finish it well. We don't want to be one of the finishers. I saw a Boston Marathon runner who dragged himself across the finish line because he couldn't walk anymore. His legs had cramped up so much. But he dragged himself across the finish line. They were saying, well, he did have some resilience. He stuck with it. He was determined to cross that finish line. But it's better to be still on your feet and in a good enough shape that you can walk across the finish line at least. You know, we want to not just limp across the finish line at the end of our lives. We want to go out with a blaze of glory. We don't want our testimony to be, they made it. You know, by the skin of their teeth, they made it. We want to develop the fortitude and the resilience inside of us to be able to carry us victoriously across that finish line. And he's already provided it for us. The pressure comes to try to make you change your confession. Heard Bill Winston say that. He was talking about how the pressure that comes, the enemy will try to put pressure on you. Why? To get you to change your stance of faith. If you're believing for a healing, he's going to try to put the pressure on you symptom-wise to get you to change your stance and say, it's not working. I'm not healed. You know, it's not working. I'm getting sicker and all that. He's trying to get you to change your stance of faith. But you can't allow that pressure to get your mouth. You can't allow that pressure to take over your thoughts to the point we talked about runaway thoughts. You've got to take every thought captive. Why is it so important to take thoughts captive? Because a thought gets down inside of you, gets down into your heart. We know that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Then as it goes out into the atmosphere, it creates your reality. As you're speaking it out, you're claiming things that you don't want to be claiming. You're out of one hand, you're saying, I'm believing Yahweh for healing, but on the other hand, you're telling your friend, I'm sick. You can't, you're canceling each other out. You know, it's one of those things that cancels each other out. When you look at Psalm 34, verse 1, it says, I'll bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. Why is his praise continually in my mouth? And why is it saying, I will bless the Lord at all times? If you felt like it, you wouldn't have to say, I will bless the Lord at all times. There's some times when you just won't feel like blessing the Lord. You won't feel like praising him. You won't feel like singing. You won't feel like walking by faith. Like Sherry said, you'll feel like curling up in a ball and just going to sleep. The enemy will try to put the pressure on you to keep your mouth shut as far as praising Yahweh and to open your mouth as far as spreading the bad things. Why is it that way? We have an enemy in this world that is coming to steal, kill, and destroy. And the biggest way he steals from us is our words. Psalm 103, Pastor Shad's favorite verse, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Again, David, or the psalmist, I think it was David in this point, the psalmist is talking to himself. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Again, if he felt like it, he wouldn't have to say that. He'll just be like, bless the Lord, No, he's talking to himself. And you know what? Gratitude attracts more of what you're thankful for. If you're thankful, if you're expressing thankfulness to Yahweh for something, then it's more of that is going to come. Faith is not about getting to a point in life, again, where you never face challenges. It's about what you do in the midst of it. Faith is all about that but. We are pressed, but not crushed. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. Again, Paul is not denying the fact that these are the feelings we have. These are the feelings. I'm acknowledging that I have feelings. We're not supposed to, as people of faith, we're not supposed to shut off the feelings and just say we're emotionless people. We're just robots going through life. We walk by faith, and I'm not going to even say I don't even have any emotions. I don't think. Yeshua said, it says that he was touched with the feelings of our infirmities. What was his reaction to Lazarus dying? He wept. And, a lot of people would say, well, that was a sign of a lack of faith. No, not in that case. He was weeping because he had a compassion for the people, but he knew what his Father was going to do in that situation. He knew he was going to raise him, but the fact that he wept, he did not allow that emotion to get him down into a pit of despair, to get him down into a place of depression or mourning or grieving with them. He remained in his position of knowing the end from the beginning. But he didn't shut off his emotions. So it's, Paul, in this verse in Philippians, he was not telling us to not feel fear, to not feel these things. He's not telling you to shut off the emotion. He's telling us don't be frightened or intimidated. In other words, don't let fear drive the car. Think of fear. We talked about peace being not just a feeling but a force. Well, it's the same with fear. Fear is not just a feeling, it's a force. And it's a force that will try to drive you down a certain road. Everything we see around us is screaming at us, trying to drive our car. But you can't allow that to take the driver's seat. You got to remain in the driver's seat. Yeah, I acknowledge that the enemy is trying to put this feeling in me, but I'm not going to allow that emotion to determine my direction in life or the decision I'm going to make. Emotions can ebb and flow. They're like a tide. They come and they go. They can be depleted. Your emotions can be depleted. How many people are just emotionally depleted in life? A lot of people are living on fumes, pretty much. But that's because the emotions are driving their life. They're not in the driver's seat anymore. Faith is about standing no matter what your emotions are saying. Your emotions might be trying to go haywire on you. Faith is not saying, I don't have those emotions. It's choosing to look at something else. Abraham chose not to look at his body. He didn't deny the fact that he was old. He didn't deny the situation in the natural, but he chose to put his eyes on something else. I'm not going to stay in this place of looking at where my emotional state is. I'm going to acknowledge that it's there, but I'm going to put my eyes on what is unseen. That's why it says that. We fix our eyes on what is unseen. Because what is seen, it's temporal. It's brief, it's fleeting. But what is unseen is eternal. That's where we fix our eyes. We have been, a soldier, think a soldier going into battle. A soldier doesn't go into battle in most cases without feeling fear. They're trained and prepared on how to have the purpose to move forward anyway, despite the fear. To not allow the fear to cause them to be paralyzed. It's what you do in spite of it. You think of, let's just say a fire drill. Ever at a place where you have a fire drill. And in the midst of a fire drill, you got the sirens going off. And what is it? It can be a stressful situation, even if you know it's a drill. It can start to put some sort of it can trigger a flight-fight response inside of you. And they're doing that on purpose to try to get you into the place when it's not a crisis, when it's not an emergency, to see, okay, how will you respond? You're the type of person that, oh, the sirens went off and I ran out of the building and ran down the street. Well, we know we can't count on you in the emergency to go and save the people that you're supposed to be saving. If your response is to sit down in the middle of the hallway and cry, once again, you might need some help in how to manage your stress in situations. We got to train that response. And it's through repetition and training that you learn, okay, this is what I do. So now when a crisis comes, now when the pressure really is on, now when there's a real circumstance that is trying to come against you, now you've trained a faith response despite what your emotions, you still might have that same, the adrenaline starts going and this starts happening, but you know how to override it. You put a system override onto it and you say, I'm taking control. I am taking the reins no matter what. And that's what builds our resilience. And so we know we've been trained for battle. And our purpose gives us the reason to stand firm when everything around us is shaking. And there's a lot of shaking going on. Anybody notice that? There's a lot of things shaking up. And that refusal to be intimidated, that steadfastness, that resilience is a sign to our opponents. It's a signal that goes out in two directions. To the enemy, it says, you've already lost. And to us, it says, God has already saved me. So you're speaking to not only to yourself, you're speaking to the enemy when you're standing firm and not allowing him to move you. Now, the Greek word for sign in that verse, that it says it will be a sign of your deliverance. It means a proof or a token or evidence. So your faith under fire becomes evidence of the fact of the ultimate defeat of darkness. So your faith under fire proves the ultimate defeat of darkness and the ultimate victory of Yahweh's people. We know that we've read the end of the book. In the end, we're coming back with him on the white horses. We're going to be the overcoming army. We need to bring that reality into our lives now. So when you stand in the midst of the storm, when you're resilient, you're not just surviving, you're testifying. You're testifying to the fact that he's the one who's backing you up. You're not standing in your own strength. It's him that's providing you with that. We don't stand strong just because we are strong. We stand strong because Yeshua already stood in our place at the cross, at the grave, and in victory over sin, death, and the devil. He's already taken our place and overcome all that. And so, the Amplified, when it says your fearlessness is a sure token and evidence of your deliverance and salvation, and that from Yahweh. Your fearlessness, your steadfastness, your bulldog faith, if you want to use Pastor George's phrase. So when you face opposition, whether it's a spiritual attack, whether it's people that are trying to come against you, whether it's your own inner criticism, sometimes you're your own worst enemy. Everybody know that. But you need to remind yourself that the enemy has already lost the battle. Yeshua triumphed over all of that in the cross. He already triumphed over it. Colossians 2:15 in the Amplified says, when he had disarmed the rulers and authorities, those supernatural forces of evil operating against us, he made a public example of them, exhibiting them as captives in his triumphal procession, having triumphed over them through the cross. The CEV says there, the Messiah defeated all powers and forces. The DLNT says, having stripped the rulers and authorities, he exposed them in public, having celebrated a triumph over them in him. I like the message. He stripped all the spiritual tyrants in the universe of their sham authority at the cross and marched them naked through the streets. Now, the next time the enemy tries to come against you, just picture that Yahweh, Yeshua, marched him naked through the streets. That's a little bit of a humiliating position for him to be in. And he no longer seems like the fierce devil that's trying to take over your life. Yeshua already stripped him of all of his power. He said, all power and all authority has been given to me, now you go. He delegated that power to us. We've got to walk in it. So we are to not flinch for even a moment. We're to stay in that place of resilience. And our courage is more than just a feeling. It's a signpost. It's a billboard. It's a sign that Yahweh is here, he is saving me, and he's the one who has the final word. And above all else, we stand strong, having done all to stand. When the dust clears, when the dust of every battle clears, we'll still be found standing strong in faith because of what he's already accomplished. Amen? Well, I trust you got something out of this message. We will see you on Saturday at 11 a.m. Until then, you have a blessed week.